What is Curriculum? By Brandon Ballantyne for EDS 708. Over the course of my research in defining what curriculum means to various different people, I discovered that even within my own definition of the word curriculum, the context of its use, who it's being discussed with, and many other things can cause the intended definition to evolve over time. I'll show you what I mean. Curriculum, a layman's definition. This is a definition that I would have leaned on more as an untrained individual just entering education. The definition of curriculum that most people with no formal training in the field of education, including myself before any of my education-related coursework, would probably go something like this. The curriculum is what the government says your kids have to learn in school. Now, having 2 degrees and 7 years of classroom teaching and 10 years total of educational experience, I know that this is absolutely not the case anymore. It's also a huge oversimplification of the word curriculum. Now, as I received formal training, and as most of you have as well, I came to better understand the word curriculum. It's much more complex, and as I've already stated, it can change and evolve depending on the context and the person with whom it is being discussed. The definition of the word curriculum as I know it today most likely takes on some form of the bold lettering here. Curriculum is the constructed plan that educators apply to their instruction in order to cover all necessary content. More often than not, curriculum builds on itself depending on what the previous year's curriculum called for. While this is the definition most frequently used when I am discussing curriculum with someone, usually with a colleague, it also has one other meaning for me at times. It's usually out of frustration. Curriculum is kind of like building blocks, but it's mandatory that we use them, and they don't always fit together very well. As an experienced educator, I have experienced instances when the curriculum can be very frustrating, either because the previous year's curriculum may not have flowed as well as I would have liked for it to have fed into what I was teaching in the current year, or what I'm teaching from my perspective obviously is not going to be built on the following year. This usually occurs when someone that has little experience in the educational realm, more often than not a politician, is able to influence the required curriculum. When I'm discussing curriculum in this context, it's usually out of frustration. It sounds something like, curriculum is the stuff that we are forced to teach in order for a politician to win more votes. When it's used like this, it's usually in a discussion with a colleague, and it's talking about content that, for lack of a better term, is antiquated, politically incorrect, or just plain wrong. Now, I read several educational articles from scholarly journals. I was able to extract 3 somewhat different definitions of curriculum based on the different experiences of the researchers. One researcher I read, whose work I read, was Innocent Malenga, and this person defined curriculum as the following: the way we dice up the experience of the world into tidy but arbitrary packages until it is again recoded as it enters the ceremonies, structures, and rituals of schooling. And this is a somewhat cynical view of the purpose of curriculum, as well as its intended application. It is difficult to argue that this is, more often than not, fairly accurate. Moving on to another researcher, Lee Flake. Mr. Flake has a little bit more of an optimistic view of what curriculum is and what it does. It is very flexible. I will give him that. According to Mr. Flake's research, the definition of instruction and curriculum may take on different meanings based on the purpose or interpretation, whether political, social, or educational. Now, I find this definition to be the most flexible and probably the most useful of the research that I read. Mr. Flake's material goes on to discuss various different descriptions of teaching as an art or a science or a combination of both. It can be several different things depending on who's describing it and who's actually doing it. And I appreciate the flexibility of Mr. Flake's definition of curriculum. Finally, Mr. Alan Collins. I enjoyed reading Mr. Collins' article, and this is what he had to say about curriculum. The school curriculum is filled with stuff that most people will never use and hence will forget as soon as they leave school or move on to the next grade. Mr. Collins has a little bit more realistic take, if not, the most Debbie Downer of takes that I read on the modern curriculum. And I really appreciated the fact that he used some real world examples of how curriculum becomes this. Usually it's governing bodies consisting of either all conservative or all liberal politicians that push their agendas and use that platform to require students to learn about what they feel is important, i.e. Reaganomics or the New Deal. It can be very frustrating to teachers, and that's what it is today, unfortunately.